Tuesday, June 25, 1940. The Wehrmacht High Command reports. The campaign in France, which lasted only 6 weeks, ended with an incomparable victory for the German arms. There has been a ceasefire since 1:35 a.m. today. During the last day of fighting yesterday, our divisions on the Atlantic coast, after breaking temporary resistance, advanced to the Royan line at the Gironde estuary Angoulême. The enemy lost further fortifications on the Rhine front and in Lorraine. At the Donon in the Vosges, as announced by special report, an enemy group of over 22,000 men, including a commanding general and 3 division commanders, surrendered. Saint-Étienne and Annonay were taken southwest of Lyon. In Savoy, our troops, using mountain troops, managed to break through the staunchly defended enemy positions in several places. Aix-les-Bains was taken. During the course of armed aerial reconnaissance off the French Atlantic coast, a British transport ship of 5,000 to 6,000 gross registered tons was successfully attacked with bombs. Further reconnaissance flights covered parts of the North Sea. On the night of June 25th, German combat units made several attack flights into central England and bombed airfields and aircraft industry facilities. A British aircraft flew over Stavanger Sola airfield during the day. Before bombs were dropped, it was shot down by our fighters. British aircraft continued their flights into northern and western Germany last night without causing any damage to military installations. Our Kriegsmarine's anti-aircraft artillery managed to shoot down 2 English aircraft on the North Sea coast. Final report of the Wehrmacht High Command on the course of operations in France from June 5th to 25th, 1940. The Battle of Annihilation in Flanders and Artois had barely ended when the Air Force and Army, including many divisions in their ranks that had not yet been in combat at all, struck the second decisive blow against France. As a prelude to the new operations, on June 3rd, strong German Luftwaffe forces attacked the airfields and the air armaments industries around Paris with devastating effect. The following day, 3 army groups of the Heer, under the high command of Colonel General von Brauchitsch, under Colonel Generals von Rundstedt, von Bock, and Ritter von Lieb, were ready for action. The aim of the new phase of the operation was to break through the French northern front, to push the torn-apart French army units to the southwest and southeast, and then to destroy them. When the divisions of Colonel General von Bock's army group attacked on June 5th across the lower Somme and the Aisne-Oise Canal, they found an enemy ready to defend himself. The French leadership was determined to defend the Weygand zone and then the Maginot Line to the last, using all available forces. A new defense method had been devised, which was hoped to be particularly successful against the feared rapid breakthrough of motorized units. In 4 days of heavy fighting, the infantry and armored divisions of the armies of Colonel General von Kluge, Colonel General von Reichenau, and General of the Infantry Strauss pushed through the enemy front. On June 9th, the pursuit against the lower Seine and towards Paris was in full swing. Rapid troops under the command of General of Infantry Hoth reached Rouen on the same day in a headlong advance and initiated the encirclement of strong enemy forces on the coast near Dieppe and St. Valery. This destroyed the enemy's western wing and secured the western flank of the main operations that were now beginning. Here, too, the Air Force made it easier for the Army to achieve success through its concentrated and tightly conducted mass attacks. She played a special role in the rapid breakthrough to the Seine, where her bombs destroyed enemy infantry and tank formations that were ready to counterattack. By cutting the railway lines and destroying the railway material, it deprived the enemy of the opportunity to move reserves and throw them at the breakthrough point. When the first signs of evacuation were noticed in Le Havre, Cherbourg, and Brest, parts of the Air Force there also quickly intervened against the port facilities, the oil tanks, and ships with visible success. The main operation on the ground began on June 9th with the attack by Colonel General von Rundstedt's army group in the Champagne and on the western bank of the Meuse. Here it was initially only the infantry divisions of the armies of General of the Cavalry Baron von Weichs, Colonel General List, and General of Infantry Busch that took the Aisne position in 2 days of heavy fighting with the bitterly defending enemy again excellently supported by the Luftwaffe, broke through and opened the way for the numerous fast troops that had been prepared. As early as June 11th, the tanks and motorized infantry divisions of General of the Cavalry von Kleist and General of Panzer Troops Guderian were deployed in the Champagne with far-reaching objectives over Troyes and Saint-Dizier. For the third time in a quarter of a century, German troops crossed the Marne. After initial hard fighting with enemy rearguards and later with completely surprised parts of the enemy Gross, the fast troops advanced through the wide breach to the southeast towards the Swiss border on the following days. Moving and supplying the extremely large number of infantry divisions and fast formations in a confined space was a masterful feat by the leadership. In the meantime, our troops had quickly overcome the lower Seine and broken into the Paris defensive position. As a result, the enemy's western wing was forced to give up further resistance. Troops of General of the Artillery von Küchler marched into Paris on June 14th. The enemy's northern front had collapsed, and our pursuit was in full swing everywhere. Infantry divisions and fast formations competed in tremendous marching feats. Under this enormous pressure, the enemy armies began to disintegrate from hour to hour. On June 14th, Colonel General Ritter von Lieb's army group also joined into the fight. In 2 days of heavy fighting against the strongest fortifications, Colonel General von Witzleben's army, effectively supported by strong artillery, broke through the Maginot Line, France's defensive wall, which was considered invincible. It thus broke the enemy's northeastern front, which was already threatened in the rear, into 2 parts again, and shattered the enemy's last belief that he could continue to assert himself. The French Eastern Front suffered the same fate when on June 15th, the army of General of Artillery Dolman overcame the huge obstacle of the fortified Upper Rhine in an attack near Colmar and penetrated the Vosges. In close exemplary cooperation with the army, the Air Force made a significant contribution to the rapid breakthrough through the Maginot Line, south of Saarbrücken, and later near Colmar and Mühlhausen. Whenever the weather permitted, Stuka and combat units attacked the fortifications with the heaviest bombs and silenced their weapons. Anti-aircraft units also provided the storming infantry with the most effective support. At the same time, other parts of the Luftwaffe helped the fast troops advance towards Besançon and up to the Swiss border. The days after June 15th were marked by unprecedented persecution from the coast to the Meuse. After the fall of Paris, the French columns flooded in front of the entire German army front to the south and southwest, repeatedly attacked by the German fighter aviation units on all retreat routes. This sharp pursuit by ground and air thwarted the French's intention to re-establish themselves behind the Loire. Over the rubble of the defeated French armies, our divisions rushed forward, filled with the thought of victory and the final redress of the injustice of Versailles. Even the Verdun fortress, a symbol of the French resistance in the World War, could not withstand the onslaught. It fell on June 15th. On June 17th, fast units reached the Swiss border southeast of Besançon, and thus closed the ring around the French forces in Lorraine, Alsace, and the Maginot Line. Bold advances across the Loire made it clear that the enemy could no longer muster any resistance. The French army had lost its effectiveness and began to lay down its arms. In this situation, the French Prime Minister, Marshal Pétain, turned to the German government with a request to announce the terms of the armistice. On June 21st, the disgrace of 1918 was wiped out with a solemn act at the historical site in the Compiègne forest in the presence of the Führer and Supreme Commander of the Wehrmacht. The French delegation then accepted the armistice conditions from the head of the Wehrmacht High Command. They were signed on June 22nd at 6:50 p.m. On the 25th of June, at 1:35 a.m., the German and Italian Wehrmacht ceased hostilities against France. The greatest campaign of all time ended after 6 weeks with the greatest victory for the German Wehrmacht. The extent to which the Luftwaffe contributed to the unusually quick and complete decisions was already acknowledged in the report of the Wehrmacht High Command on the first phase in the West. This applies no less to the second part of the campaign. Under the command of Field Marshal Göring, the Luftwaffe was able to fully leverage the air supremacy it had achieved at the beginning of the campaign into victory. These battles were essentially carried out by Air Fleets 2 and 3 under the energy and superior leadership of the generals of the aviators Kesselring and Spurla. The large aviators and anti-aircraft units of the generals of the aviators Grauert and Keller, the general of the anti-aircraft artillery Weiss, the lieutenant generals Bogach, Ritter von Greim, and Lorzer, the major generals Kohler, Deslock, and Freiherr von Richthofen demonstrated their intrepid and never-weakening attack spirit in leadership as well as in battle. In its often difficult and loss-filled battle, the Army welcomed the Air Force's willingness to make sacrifices with gratitude and enthusiasm. The Navy was faced with new tasks through the occupation of the Dutch, Belgian, and French Channel coasts. Following the Army's operations, the ports were expanded into bases for light forces and set up for defense. From here, the speedboats could be used in sea areas that were previously inaccessible to them and which, given their character as coastal areas, offered particularly good opportunities for success. The speedboats succeeded in ongoing operations to destroy a number of enemy destroyers and transport ships through night attacks, and thereby increase and supplement the effect of our Air Force on the enemy transport fleet used to evacuate Dunkirk. On June 6th, the coastal defense taken over by our naval artillery was able to report its first success with the sinking of a British speedboat. Minesweeping forces cleared the harbor entrances and shipping lanes on the captured coast of Mines. As early as June 8th, it was possible to allow neutral shipping to leave Dutch, Belgian, and northern French ports for German, Danish, Swedish, and the other Baltic Sea ports. During this period, our submarines operated with considerable success off the British Isles and the French coast. The world watched this unprecedented victory of German arms with admiration, astonishment, or with horror, depending on its attitude. What they all have in common, however, is the question of how such successes can be explained, especially in such a short time. If the former Allies believe that the reasons lie in the German numerical superiority, this does not correspond to the historical truth. The German Air Force was numerically much stronger than that of the Allies, all right. But the German Western Army initially attacked on May 10th with a smaller number of divisions than the French, English, Belgian, and Dutch divisions opposing it. The operations in the West did not begin, as in Poland, from a strategically favorable starting point. In a frontal attack against the strongest fortifications, usually located behind rivers and canals, the German troops had to force a breakthrough, which created the conditions for encircling and destroying the enemy and enabled the deployment of further divisions. The reasons for Germany's successes lie deeper. They are to be found where Germany's enemies believed they saw our weakness, in the revolutionary dynamics of the Third Reich and its National Socialist leadership. It has created the best modern combat instrument with a strict and unified top leadership. It has found the synthesis between soberly considered and careful preparation and the greatest boldness in the planning and conduct of operations. It has increased the achievements of the German soldier, which have been famous at all times, to an extent that can no longer be explained by the fulfillment of a patriotic duty, but rather by an idea that supports and moves the entire people. The exemplary personal commitment of all military leaders in the Army and the Air Force, down to the lowest ranks, will be a hallmark for all time. In ground combat, in the front line, and at the head of their formations in the air, they pulled their troops and squadrons forward and boldly, agilely, and decisively exploited every situation without hesitating or waiting for orders. At the head of his Army Corps, the commanding general, Lieutenant General Ritter von Speck, died a hero's death. Like him, 16,812 brave officers, non-commissioned officers, and men from the three branches of the Wehrmacht gave their lives for the Führer, the people, and the Reich between the 5th and 25th of June. 9,921 officers, non-commissioned officers, and men are missing. Some of them will also have died a hero's death. 68,511 officers, non-commissioned officers, and men were wounded. If anything is capable of making the achievements of the German Wehrmacht appear in an even higher light, It is these losses, bitter and painful for the individual, but almost unbelievably small for the entire German people, with which the victory over France was achieved. From May 10th until the armistice, according to the figures so far, they amount to 27,074 fallen. Missing, 18,384. Wounded, 111,034. A total of 156,492 officers, non-commissioned officers, and men. In contrast, our losses in the World War amounted to, in 1914 in the West, 638,000 men, including 85,000 dead. In the attack on Verdun in 1916, 310,000 men, including 41,000 dead. In the Battle of Somme 1916, 417,000 men, including 58,000 dead. In the Great Battle in France from March 21st to April 10, 1918, 240,000 men, including 35,000 dead. About the enemy's losses in 1940, there are no clues. What is certain is that over 1.9 million French prisoners alone were taken, including 5 commanders-in-chief of French armies and around 29,000 officers. Since June 5th, in addition to the previous loot, the entire armament and equipment of around 55 additional French divisions fell into German hands, not counting the armament and equipment of the Maginot Line and the other French fortifications. The loot also includes almost all of France's heavy and heaviest artillery, as well as an incalculable amount of other armament, equipment, and supplies. The enemy air force has lost since June 4th, 383 aircraft in air battles, 155 due to anti-aircraft fire, 239 destroyed on the ground, 15 questionable whether due to anti-aircraft fire or in air combat, a total of 792 aircraft, plus 26 barrage balloons and 1 tethered balloon. A destroyer group achieved its 100th first kill by June 14th, and a fighter group achieved its 50th kill by June 11th. The Kriegsmarine sunk auxiliary cruisers, other auxiliary warships, transport, and merchant ships as follows. Auxiliary cruiser Carinthia, 23,000. Auxiliary cruiser Scottstown, 17,000. Troop transport Orama, 21,000. Naval tanker Oil Pioneer, 9,100. A transporter 14,000. An auxiliary cruiser 9,000. In addition, our submarines have sunk over 400,000 gross registered tons in merchant shipping space since mid-May, a total of 493,100 gross registered tons. Since June 5th, the Luftwaffe has destroyed an auxiliary warship and a destroyer with a total of 5,100, as well as 40 merchant ships with a total of 299,000 gross registered tons. The following were damaged: 3 cruisers, 1 destroyer, and 25 merchant ships. In addition to these enormous enemy losses, the provisions of the Armistice Treaty also eliminated the remaining remnants of the French Wehrmacht from the further course of the war. After this, the most powerful victory in German history over the enemy of the Greater German Reich, who was considered the strongest land power in the world and fought as skillfully as he did bravely, there are no more allies. Only one enemy remains: England.
Join us also tomorrow for the subsequent Wehrmacht Report. Subscribe to our channel and be part of a unique historical experience. For more military history audiobooks, visit the YouTube channel of Major Intonio. Thank you for listening, and so long.